if you had the chance to bring back from the past any scientist and have a beer with that person and just chat about the modern state of your shared discipline, who would that be? What would you talk about?
I was going to say Charles Darwin, but I'm not sure whether he was a beer drinker. It's interesting that he came to mind first, actually, because there's a few other strong candidates out there I'd love to talk to. But I'd just love to quiz him about his take on the current state of evolutionary thinking. Yeah, because his disciples have got very focused, shall we say, in particular avenues, and it's just started to reopen in the last decade. But I would just love to hear his take on how it narrowed for a long time and where it is now.
Yeah. And when you, in terms of the narrowing, is this sort of the focus on the Mendelian world, or and what do you mean about the narrowing?
I don't mind clearly the modern synthesis. No, I'm more concerned with the questions around how evolutionary theory has got to a point where you kind of have a group of people who say that something can only be described as having evolved if it fits a very what I think is quite a narrow definition of a neo-Darwinian framework about what's sometimes called Lewontin's recipe of evolution, and even a narrow interpretation of that. So it's as if I find that personally troubling and restrictive as a scientist, but I'm kind of curious what Darwin would make of that. I'd also ask him about how social Darwinism has echoed through a century and a half or so, and is still, I think, riddled in our cultural thinking, but not often to the good in my view. But I'd love to get his take on that.
So I also want to ask about just the origins of this paper that we're going to talk about today. So I think I got the sense that came out of you going to the Santa Fe Institute and talking with others there. So tell us what happened. What's the origin story?
The origin story is I wrote a paper in Trends in Ecology and Evolution in 2018. It got published, but I'd been working on it for many years, called Selection for Gaia Across Multiple Scales, I think. And I would sort of brought some of those ideas to a workshop at the Santa Fe Institute, the one and only time I've actually got to go to the Santa Fe Institute, thanks to my ecologist friend Martin Scheffer. And we were ostensibly at the SFI in a working group looking at some other work we did on the future of the human climate niche, and bringing together Tim Kohler, an archaeologist, Martin, an ecologist, myself, a systems scientist. We were developing our interdisciplinary thinking around that. Do humans have a climate niche? How has it changed? And so on. And we were riffing off that. But for some reason, because I'd been thinking hard about this broadening of evolution into what I'm going to talk about, persistence-based selection and so on and so forth, as we were in that environment, I was just sort of randomly presenting to the others on how I thought that this opening up of evolutionary thinking could be really helpful to try and revisit the question of how whole cultures evolved, and even whether whole ecosystems could evolve, both of which have generally been policed out by the neo-Darwinian kind of keepers of the castle, if you like. Not that I think that they're all wrong, by the way, but they've the keepers of the keep or the castle have been pretty stringent about whether you're allowed to talk about. They generally would say you can't talk about ecosystem evolution. There's no way ecosystems can evolve, and I believe the window is starting to reopen on that. And because we were thinking anyway about the evolution of societies, I just thought I'll throw that into the mix and see what the others make of it. And yeah, Martin and Tim Kohler and Pablo Marquet and I were really, it was a small group, and we just started riffing off that. So we got distracted from our original task and started riffing off that, which is why you go to a place like the Santa Fe Institute, I guess. And we had Henry Wright and others were hanging out at the Institute. He's famous, I think, archaeologist and someone who's done papers on cultural evolution for decades. And they were in the building, and we just started dragging them in the room and started talking about this stuff. And it just got it got what you love as a scientist. It got that kind of buzz around it where I began to realise that some existing strands of thought in completely different disciplines all converged in basically the same theoretical framework.
Yeah.
And so that's where it started. And then over time, this paper didn't have an easy gestation, survival of the systems. Over time, I kind of co-opted one or two other friends to help me out on the paper on different bits of it. So the group grew a little bit.
That's awesome. It sounds almost like the origin of this paper is an example of the process that you're talking about in the paper, right? It's sort of, you guys have coalesced into a hypercycle of ideas that is
I hope so. It felt like that, yeah. And it had also this brutal selection, like most papers go through, where you have different incarnations of it. You're trying to get published in different places, and it depends who you run up against as your referees, what they make of it. And so there's a much more mathematical version of the paper that started to emerge somewhere else and then got chucked out. And so there's some more stuff. It was fun, and there's some more stuff that I need to publish in a more kind of massive theoretical place, I think, to try and advance the theory.